Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. Y'all ready for this?
Da, 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 da.
Royalty.
Okay, sorry. Things that happened before we're on the air. So, hey, I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
And thank you very much for joining us. Hey, Mary Kay, did you talk to Ben about the thing we said we were going to talk to Ben about?
Yeah.
You did? And is Ben okay with that thing we said we were going to do?
Oh, yeah. We're good.
Okay,
Good
because
okay.
I realized I was about to announce it and then realized that we hadn't actually talked to him yet. So anyway, hey, welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. Thank you for joining us here this lovely Wednesday evening. If it's your first time watching the program, welcome. And the tagline there says it all. What we endeavor to do here is we try to talk about whatever people out there in the world are talking about, whether that be people within the Christian community, even the community at the population is large, or American culture at large is talking about. But what makes this show stand out as being unique is we do try to bring a uniquely Christian perspective to it. So when we talk about these issues, at least what we try to do is we always try to put Christ first and talk about it from that perspective. Whether we succeed or not, I don't know. You be the judge. Also, you are invited to be part of the discussion. We are live right now at Wednesday at 5:30, if you're watching us live, on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. If you would like to be part of the discussion here today, all you need to do is put a comment in the live chat on the YouTube feed, the YouTube video, or you can put a comment in the Facebook post for the Facebook video. I have both of them pulled up here on my trusty computer in front of me, and you can ask us a question, make a comment, agree with us, disagree with us, whatever's on your mind. And as long as it's appropriate, I will go ahead and read it here on the air as soon as there's a natural break in the conversation, and we'll carry on the conversation. Also, you should know that your comment, whether you post it on YouTube or Facebook, as long as technology is working, big joke based on for those of you who watched the show last week, and it will appear right over there in that box to Ben's left. So you can actually see it there as well and follow the conversation along. Even if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see everything over there on YouTube, Facebook, vice versa, whatever it may be. So the announcement that I was kind of leading here at the beginning that I was suggesting or indicating I was going to say, is that this show is actually, we're not going to be on the air for the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Next week, because it's Holy Week and busy. The following week, because it's the week after Easter and sleeping. So that's the long. And to be honest with you, as you'll discover, we got some really exciting announcements coming up here out of Trinity about what's coming up after Easter.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spoil any of that because I'm filming something with Pastor Jay about it tomorrow, I think. But stay tuned, because I say sleeping the week after Easter, but we don't miss a beat around here. We've actually got some really cool things coming over the 7 weeks, right? It's 7 weeks.
7 weeks.
After Easter, we got something fun coming. Stay tuned. That's your tease. But we will not be on the air here for the next 2 weeks. So get your Trinity Talk Live fix in today. And boy, are you going to get your Trinity Talk Live fix in today, because we got some doozies to go over.
Yes, we do.
And so we are going to get started with our first story today. And our first story actually technically happened before last week's show, but we didn't talk about it. It was brand new. And lots of times, not to say we've never done it, we obviously did with the shooting in D.C., we talked about it. But lots of times we don't necessarily talk about something that's like really, really fresh, because you want to kind of get a little more perspective on it before because this isn't a news reporting show, this is a commentary show. And so generally speaking, you want to know what you're talking about before you comment on it, and time helps that.
That's the plan, at least.
That's the plan, at least. Somebody will tell us that we don't know what we're talking about, but that's okay, because opinions are valued. And we're not always right. At least one of us isn't. Anyway, so seriously, the first topic that we're going to be talking about today is the mass shooting that happened at the 3 Atlanta spas on Tuesday. It was the evening of Tuesday, March 18th. There were 3 spas. 2, I believe, were either one was just outside Atlanta, and 2 were in the city limits, or vice versa. But they were all right there in the Atlanta area. And they were, during that, 8 people were actually killed, 6 of whom were Asian females. And the gunman was caught pretty darn quickly, apparently with the help of his family. Once the police, I'm assuming through surveillance videos or whatever, figured out who it was, they knew who they were looking for. Robert Aaron Long was the man's name, 21-year-old, and his family helped the police track him down through his cell phone, actually. And he was actually caught 150 miles south of Atlanta on his way down to Florida, where he indicated that he was intending to commit more shootings, some kind of, whether it be another spa or some kind of pornographic industry target, was what he claimed his target was going to be down there. Now, what has gotten a lot of the attention, I guess you could say, in the week since this happened, is Mr. Long's membership with the Crabapple First Baptist Church in Milton, Georgia. He was, growing up a part of the youth group there, and a lot of people, and we can get more into specific this in the commentary section, but there's been some people that have been, from my perspective, I'll say almost trying to blame the church's teachings on sexual purity because what Mr. Long has indicated, well, we'll get into the commentary. There's actually, people are saying are being inconsistent on their opinions on this, but Mr. Long said is, because obviously a lot of people came out and said, oh, this looks like it was a racially motivated crime. This is a hate crime. And Mr. Long told police that he actually targeted these places because he suffers from a sexual addiction. He saw them as a temptation. Matter of fact, there were some reports that he had frequented these establishments before. And so in his mind, he was eliminating the temptation by doing this. And that was what his motivation was. That's the general overview. I'll save my commentary since you get to go first. So, and go.
Yeah, as a evangelical community, we have seen over the past months or even year, I believe, cautionary tale after cautionary tale. And I would lump this into that category of cautionary tales. Certainly what happened, first and foremost, I want to say was tragic. We want to pray and support the families of the victims, certainly, as well as the family of the shooter. And I understand that that's very difficult and can only imagine what they're going through. Also, one thing that I noted, I don't think was in these specific articles, but there was another one that said his father is a youth pastor. So he's not even just a member of this Baptist church, but a PK, a preacher's kid. Yeah. And that, of course, adds to all of the comments that are going to come with that. Whether that's warranted or not, I think we would do well as a Christian community to evaluate, what kind of sin that he was involved in and what his mindset had to be in to get him to that point. I think we want to state categorically that what he did was certainly not in line with true Christian belief, and that was the reasoning that the church revoked his membership, was that they could not call him a truly regenerate believer, and that's the Southern Baptist understanding, a regenerate believer. So we want to state categorically that what he did was evil and wicked, and clearly premeditated, because he had the intention of committing more acts of violence and murder. And so whatever the motivation is, there's certainly, what sin does is it takes and takes and takes and takes and never gives back. And so, and I've heard some commentators on this before say that I'm sure Mr. Long, and we see this cautionary tale with what happened with Ravi Zacharias. There's some similarities there with the whole spa thing and that temptation there. Certainly they never thought that their sin would lead them down that path, which is why I say it's a cautionary tale to any of us, to never think that we would never do something like that. Most likely, probably not, but by the grace of God. However, it's just cautionary that we should all be looking at sin and be killing sin, or sin will be killing you, as the old saying goes. But it's very tragic and disheartening. I think the conversation now, though, is geared around what the perception is in the world of Christianity. Is the church's teachings kind of exacerbating or facilitating these kind of mindset, that this cycle of sin, guilt, and then in his mind eliminating temptation. Do you think that's a fair argument against the church? Or
No.
is this an individual
No,
choice?
I don't. And I will start out by saying I did one of the articles that I found. I don't even remember what was one of the ones you sent me or another one I found. I found a very interesting comment from a pastor. His name was Duke Kwan. He's the lead pastor of Grace Meridian Hill in Washington, D.C. And he was addressing the disagreement that's going on there about whether or not these are racially motivated or otherwise. And I just want to say this at the outset because I did find his comment to be something we should bear in mind. He said, keep in mind whether or not this incident proves to be a racially motivated hate crime. It's gutting news for an Asian American community already reeling from the recent rise in violent racist attacks. In other words, this gets back to the empathy thing we always talk about. And I think it is an important discussion to have whether or not this was a racially motivated crime. But we should always have that empathy and understand that, within the Asian American community that's really been experiencing this uptick, you see why they're going to go there at first. Now, it doesn't mean we don't, try to still, step back and take a look at it rationally. But yeah, I mean, you've got to have the empathy for that and what they're going through. And so from that perspective, I can certainly understand. Maybe that's a wrong word to use, but I mean, I can appreciate this pastor's point. So I did want to say that. Now, to your point about whether or not the criticism is fairly launched against Christianity, as far as whether or not our doctrine of sexual purity is leading to this, I would just point out that Christianity also teaches that you shouldn't murder people.
Right.
It's amazing how that fact was nowhere in any of the articles I read preparing for this. And what it illustrates to me is we've talked about narratives and worldviews and things like that before on the show, and the idea is that we're seeing this more and more so. It's always been a fact of culture, but I think we're seeing it more and more so with the divisiveness we're seeing in our American culture today, that people have preconceived narratives of what they believe to be true, largely based upon which side of the proverbial aisle they find themselves on, and they are going to see events in the world through that lens. And so they're going to interpret whatever they see as if it is almost by default evidence to support whatever their lens happens to be, whatever And so, and what happens is we end up then taking only those things that support that narrative and ignoring those that don't.
Okay. Confirmation bias. Happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of examples of that in this story that we may or may not get into here today, but that's one of them. What you bring up is the fact that people want to say that, and I'm not just saying people proverbially, I've got articles right here in front of me that say this, basically, that the church's teachings are contributing to these acts of violence. And so they're essentially blaming the church and saying, you need to stop, you need to rethink. Matter of fact, if I can get my glass on, I can find one here in particular. Oh, yeah, here's one right here in front of me. Sheila Gregoire, Gregoir. Who's a Christian author who has voiced extensive concerns about the way evangelicalism portrays sexuality, stated it's time for the evangelical church to realize that the way we talk about sex and lust and porn poses a danger to women, as the Atlanta shooting all too horrifically showed us, and 8 people, including 7 women, died for it. That, to me, well, there's a seed of a conversation to be had there. I do think in some Christian circles we treat sex as if it's completely taboo instead of it is created by God and there's a place for it and we should be free to talk about it.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's doing this exactly thing. It's taking this one aspect of Christianity and say, look, your Christianity is contributing to these acts of violence because of its teaching on sexuality. Well, wait a minute. If Christianity is contributing to the acts of violence by teaching about sexuality, why can't you say that why can't we have the counter evidence of that the act of violence itself runs directly contrary to the Christianity teaching on the value of life and murder?
There's a lot of assumptions in that quote too that remain to be fleshed out and explained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think, in answer to your question, I don't think it's a fair criticism because I think it's looking at it through that preferred narrative lens and only looking at the evidence from one side.
And I would agree, it's kind of a softball analogy, but no, absolutely, I don't think it's a fair argument to say that, certainly. And as we look at some of the other stories that we've got here, you could look at culture and the hypersexualization of culture, and that leading to where does the buck stop there? If it's the church's teachings that are responsible, ultimately it's going to come down to it was the choices of this individual,
and which is what his church said, emphatically.
And
right.
So the church is not culpable for that. The church's teachings are not culpable for that. Ultimately it goes back to God is not culpable for our sin. So,
when I also asked the question when I saw this lady's comment here, I was like, well, what do you propose the solution to be? And of course, the article didn't say that. Are you saying we just abandon the church's teaching on sexuality?
Right.
Where do you draw the line? I agree that in some instances the church should feel more free to talk about sex and intercourse and things like that. I think sometimes maybe we can be faulted for not being open to talking about that more. But we still talk about it in the context of here's the line, here's what's appropriate and here's what's not. Right. And so my question to people who have the same opinion of this lady who say, I think that the church needs to reevaluate its teaching on sexuality. My question is, are you just saying, do you think the line should be drawn somewhere else? Or are you saying we should throw out the line entirely, which we'll get to our second story here, I think a little bit too. Because that's kind of an issue is that I think a lot of this is people say we should change, but there's another question that they need to ask. Change how? What are you proposing the change be? Because when all we talk about is we need to reevaluate this, it really comes across in the end as more of just a free-for-all, that we want to abandon all authority, all limits, all lines upon us, and that's rebellion against God.
Right, and my gut reaction would be that somebody who has that position would respond to you, and chances are they haven't really thought of that. They haven't really thought of what they exactly mean. Should we change the line or throw it out altogether? Or if they have thought of that much, they certainly haven't thought of the repercussions of throwing out the line altogether, right. As we certainly see in our culture today, which is what we're trending toward, and there are consequences.
Yeah, and I worry about our culture. I mean, it's no big secret here. We talked about it before, but just talking about that preferred narrative lens. One thing that kind of, from one perspective, I understood it. One other perspective, it disturbed me as an attorney, as someone who relies upon evidence, is the overwhelming. It's one thing when this first happened to say, 6 out of 8 of them were Asian. There were Asian spas. I wonder if this was a hate crime. I think that's perfectly legitimate.
Sure.
I think it's perfectly legitimate. But then as the facts and evidence start to come in, to continue to insist upon that is dangerous in my mind. And I'll tell you, here's one article that I saw, and because I'm going to be kind of critical of this author, I won't call them out by name because I'm using them to illustrate a point. But one line in this article says, police have said they don't have enough evidence yet to classify the incident as a hate crime, even though most of Long's victims were Asian women. So is this author saying that the mere fact that the victims happen to be Asian, that in and of itself is enough to label it as a hate crime? That's a pretty dangerous standard in my mind. And I think, evidence matters. Now, in this case, what has come out since the shootings happened is, first of all, to my knowledge and what I've seen, and someone who's watching online can certainly correct me if I'm wrong on this, I've seen nothing come out like we've seen in some previous cases where things did turn out to be hate crimes, where you got social media posts and things like that. Nothing in this person's background to indicate any animosity towards people of any particular protected class. To the contrary, in late 2019 and 2020, he was actually in a facility receiving treatment for sexual addiction. And while he was there, he had a roommate who has since come out publicly or posted something on social media that says, and by the way, while he was there, he talked about the fact that he was struggling with sexual addiction and he had a number of relapses, and the way he would relapse was by going to these spas. And so it's like the pieces start to fit together, that Yeah, it does. There's evidence there anyway. At least the evidence we have available right now. And of course, I'm always willing to reevaluate based on what we learn. But the evidence that there right now seems to be he was telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I've seen a number of authors, a number of articles that have come out and tried to say, why are the police just taking it at face value what he says? It's like, well, they're not. Number one, they were just reporting what he said. They weren't drawing any conclusions.
Right.
They said they haven't drawn any conclusions yet. But number two, let's look at what the evidence supports, and here's why I think that's important. Because hate crime is real, okay? Hate crime is real. And in my mind, it diminishes that when you start calling everything a hate crime. It's kind of like the little boy who cried wolf. Eventually, what you're going to do is it's escape velocity kind of situation where if you keep calling everything a hate crime, then eventually you're going to get pushback because someone's going to look at it and say, wait a minute. The culture's going to start like that does not fit that model, all right? And then what happens when you do that? Now all of a sudden, real hate crimes go diminished, or they don't get noticed as much, or they don't get they lose credibility because you've cried wolf on so many things. And so it's not that I'm certainly, please don't misunderstand me, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of hate crimes. If anything, I'm trying to elevate the importance of punishing and appreciating and recognizing hate crime. But I think when we rush to judgment on things like this, we actually hurt that cause.
Well, and the other part of that, the other side of the coin, is that in rushing to draw that conclusion, and I'm sure you would know better than I, that determining somebody's motivation for a crime, which is part of the qualifications of something being a hate crime, it has to be racially motivated.
Right.
And so to determine somebody's motivation is very difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt.
It is. I mean, there are mental state requirements we call it mens rea in any kind of crime, really, and different mental state requirements depending on the crime. But in this case, you're right. You got to a hate crime, you got to show what was motivating it. How do you do that? You do it through things like social media posts and things like that. Ben's got an important call he's got to take, apparently. No. Allison Mayer here on YouTube says, in my opinion, the quick assumptions to cry racism is diluting the effect of true hate crimes.
Yeah.
And then their next comment, you're going to like this one. Golly, every time I write something, Ken says it. Allison, this is why we invited you on the show a couple weeks ago. You're a perfect substitute.
Good stand-in, yeah.
And then she also says here, I've had to erase many statements because Ken has made the point, great minds think alike. Oh, well, I agree that your mind is a great one, Allison. As for mine, we'll reserve judgment on that one. So anyway, so that's my biggest concern about the way our culture is going, or one of my biggest concerns about the way our culture is going in this narrative confirmation bias perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And it creates that echo chamber of, if everything is a hate crime, then yeah.
If everyone's super, no one is.
Exactly.
Name the reference. First one online.
Incredible. Oh.
Dude! Seriously!
Finish the last syllable.
Trying to interact with you out there in viewer land, and he's spoiling it. All right. So, all right. Well, I will say, just looking at YouTube, somebody has liked our video. Someone has disliked our video. If you dislike what we're saying, please feel free to comment. I mean, this is not supposed to be an echo chamber. I mean, we do like interacting with people who disagree with us. So if you disagree with us, let us know, and let's talk about it. You are very much invited. All right. Are we done with that story?
Yeah, I think.
All right.
Unless anybody has anything else to contribute in the comments.
Well, we can always come. We've done that before.
We can always
because of the
circle back.
20-second delay. But why don't you go ahead and tell us what our next story is?
All right, so this one kind of ties into what we're talking about with as far as the hypersexualization of our culture and pushing that line further on, kicking that line further down the field, so to speak. It's in regards to the Grammy performance by Cardi B and what was the other one? Megan Thee Stallion.
Yeah.
So they performed Cardi B's song WAP, which I will not say what that even stands for. I will not even recommend that song because it is obscene, very clearly. And so there's been a lot of backlash from that. Notably, the frontman for Skillet. There's a Christian band Skillet, and the frontman John Cooper, he has a podcast that he does, and in his podcast he addressed this performance from Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion at the Grammys. Now, the performance itself, this song is very hypersexualized, and in this performance, effectively, to my understanding, the two women essentially simulated sex on the stage, or sexual acts. And so there's a lot of pushback, even by the FCC, even from the FCC, who admitted that they have received, quote, dozens of complaints since that performance. John Cooper, in his take on it, I'll just give this quote. He says, "We're living in a world right now where there are certain Dr. Seuss books that you cannot sell on eBay. They're just too much for anybody to even be allowed to buy. They're being yanked down from all the bookstores and stuff like that. It's just too much. It's too evil. So you can't go on eBay and buy it, but you can and must applaud the sexual degradation of Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion simulating sex together on the Grammys. This is a perfect example," he said. "You must celebrate it. In fact, if you don't, you're actually a bad person, and you kind of like don't love people, right? You're actually not nice. This is the perfect example." The example he's talking about is, in those days, Scripture tells us that people will call good evil and evil good. He goes on to make the note of, this is kind of a gradual process, that nobody flat out turns that switch automatically, but there's always a justification to it. He said, he made the allusion to dictators in the past. Every dictator in history has said that what they were doing was good. There's always a justification for it. And so there's kind of this slippery slope that he's warning us of culture, and that tendency now to call evil good and good evil.
You're not going to do the punchline. You're not going to say what he said right after that.
No.
All right, I'll bring it up because it's part of what gets people's gander up.
Okay.
But anyway, so the issue with first of all, in regard to the dance itself, did I watch the Grammys? No, I did not. I did go back and watch an Entertainment Tonight story on it, which showed some excerpts from it. And I think that your characterization of the dance was polite, to say the least. So it was disturbing. Now, the reaction to the comments, this man's comments about this, it has been, I guess, two ways I could look at it. Mischaracterizing his thought process, yes. Predictable, yes. Saw it coming a mile away. And this gets into, when we talk about, as an apologist, one thing I talk about, I steal this from Greg Kokel, is that, when we're defending the Christian faith out there, it's not enough just to know the facts. You're trying to present it in a winsome manner, is what he says. And so we do need to be aware of the manner in which we are presenting it. And the wisdom of Solomon comes into play here. Let's talk about whether or not, something could be technically true. And everything he said, I believe is factually correct. It is accurate. Was it wise to object to it in this manner?
I think we should, I guess, tell about which manner.
There's two things.
Noted a specific dictator.
There's two things. The first one I'll bring up is the Dr. Seuss one.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Because the only reason I bring that up is because I think it's unwise to hitch your point on this issue to a stance on some other issue, just as a general rule, because he could lose people. He doesn't know how people feel about the Dr. Seuss issue. And now what's happened is you have some people that might have been sympathetic to you on this issue, but because you've hitched your stance here to your stance over here, and people don't agree with you over here, guess what? They're not going to agree with you over here, even though they might have otherwise. So I just, that's one of those, let the issue stand on, and your argument on the issue stand on its own merits. In regard to the dictator issue, of course, he brought up Hitler, which we've talked about on the show before. And I need my glasses because this one printed out so small.
Part, yeah.
Yeah, that's very predictable. He said every dictator in history says that what they were doing was good. That's what they believe. If you go back and you read some of Hitler's speeches, he's like, I'm going to set people free from the bondage of the 10 Commandments. In his mind, he's a liberator. And so, as soon as he mentions the name Hitler, it's there you go.
People automatically shut
it down. They say he's comparing Cardi B to Hitler. And he did come out with a statement afterwards, says, no, I wasn't. I'm not equating her or the Grammys to these Nazi regimes and what happened before. What he was trying to do is that he was clearly trying to make a point about what happens when the broader point, but what happens when we redefine good and evil.
Yeah.
All right. Even in screenwriting, when you're writing, a movie guy, when we're writing a screenplay for a movie, one of the things we talk about is that every good villain in a movie, book, whatever it may be, every good villain thinks they're the hero of their story. That's why I love Thanos as a villain. I mean, Thanos is a prime example of this. If people have seen the Avengers movies, Infinity War and Endgame, you'll know Thanos thought he was the good guy. He genuinely thought he was the hero of that story. And that's the reason that makes good storytelling, is because that reflects reality. We don't have villains in our history, real life villains.
Two-dimensional evil mustache.
Exactly. That's not what they are. They're real human people that got that way for a reason.
Yeah.
And so his broader point was absolutely correct. This is the danger when you redefine good and evil. He sees this as an admittedly smaller instance of redefining good and evil. And he's concerned about the direction the culture is going. You can say that without specifically bringing up Hitler. And so it's one of these things where I think it was correct. I understood what he was trying to, it's factually correct. I understood what he was trying to get at. Maybe not the wisest way to do it. That being said, and here's where I'm going to get people to say that I'm wishy-washy and everything. I also get frustrated with, cancel culture. We've talked about it in the past. And the idea that, the whole concept of giving someone the benefit of the doubt does not exist in cancel culture. I mean, the idea is he said something, therefore, without even trying to think if there's any innocent way he could have intended this, I'm going to assume that this is what he was doing, and now I'm going to punish him as a result. And that's, I think, the nature of the response we've seen to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard some things before in regards to the whole Dr. Seuss thing, and I think that's a fair point. Hitching your argument over here to the one over here that may not necessarily equate. I've seen some responses there where people are saying, well, I'm not letting my children listen to Cardi B. Okay, point taken. We can disagree on that, but that's an issue for a separate day. I do agree, maybe not in the way, like you're saying, the way that he's presenting it, but I agree with his overall point, which is it is a slippery slope when we begin to, when something like that is applauded, and this gets back to a point that we were making before we came on the air, was, I guess, what is the point of a performance like that? Because something like that, again, doesn't happen just overnight. How do you get from what our views on sexuality were in the 50s? And this even ties back to our point before. Can you say that something like that's a hypersexualization, maybe fueling some of the sex addiction of people like that, which then turns, and again, I'm not placing blame on Cardi B for the shooting in Atlanta. I'm just saying there's this hypersexualization in our culture that has been a gradual progression, and it's done in the name of free, not only just women's rights, but sexual liberation and freedom and all of these things that are supposed to be good things. Empowerment.
Yeah, that's the key phrase.
For some reason, this is supposed to empower me by being able to talk about sex in the way that, in using the words that she talks about them out in public. We're not talking about what people are doing alone in their bedrooms. Okay. We're talking about out in public for the consumption of anybody who wants it. And what station did the Grammys?
I don't know, one of the major networks, I'm sure.
Okay.
I don't know what, yeah.
Where any child can stumble upon it.
Right. It's not like it was late night. It was prime time, wasn't it?
And not just that. I mean, that's just the lyrics of the song. Now, the stuff we listened to when we were younger, I know there were some very questionable stuff in there, but I've been a teacher for a while, and I know for a fact that there are students that are listening to or seeing things on social media, or whether it's Tumblr, TikTok, whatever, and they're repeating them because it makes them cool to repeat it, but I don't think they know what they're saying.
Sure.
I don't think they have a clue what they're saying, and that they're saying something that's inappropriate. or an innuendo that they shouldn't be saying. I guess my other thing is it doesn't necessarily empower me to go on national TV and simulate anything that I would do in my bedroom alone with my husband.
Yeah, and I would make the argument.
I don't know how that gives me power.
Exactly. I would make the argument that it has the reverse effect, that it's degrading, and objectifying. Honestly, would be my argument.
Yeah, and this is where and Allison Mayer here says, the incident with Cardi B offends me. I don't want to be treated like an object, and that's how I feel when I listen to sexually explicit material. And I guess this is where everything you guys are hitting on, and Allison's hitting on here. I mean, it gets down to the way we influence culture, people influence culture, and it's through rhetoric. I mean, there was Megan the Stallion, and this is in the context of some people that were criticizing the song itself. This is before the dance issue. Well, interesting side note. One thing she said was like, "Why is this your focus right now? If you have an issue with what I'm saying, don't listen to it. Tune out because I didn't ask you to tune in." To which I just kind of reply, "Okay, well, if you have an issue with what Gina Carano is tweeting, then just don't listen to her, look at her tweets." You know, we get to the hypocrisy level there a little bit. But besides that, leaving that aside for the moment, she said also, some people just don't know what to do when a woman is in control and taking ownership of her own body. This is rhetoric. I mean, taking ownership of her own body, and this is one of the things we talk about. You know, and again in apologetic circles, is when somebody would say something like that to me, the first question is, well, what do you mean by that? What is it? Because clearly nobody is like literally trying to take your body from you. I mean, so you clearly don't. That's not something you mean literally. You have some concept of what you mean by that. That's a rhetorical term you're using to mean something. And of course, what it generally comes across as meaning is removal of all boundaries. It's the same thing we talked about before. This is what rebellion against God looks like. We don't want to have any limitations placed upon us, any rules, any restrictions. But we don't want to say it that way because that doesn't come across as well. So we want to say it as, I want to take ownership of my own body. And of course, that's another one, the tagline in the abortion debate, which I'm not going to go into that now. That's another subject for another show. Allison also does say here, I feel like this sexual freedoms encourages women to be treated like objects and not the precious treasures God created us to be. Yeah, and there's, look, I'm glad you said it, Allison, because it's something that I've been thinking about too. But, you know, I'm also very much aware of the fact that, you know, if they hear it coming out of my mouth, they're going to say, well, he's just a man saying it. But I do think there's an inconsistency between the correct view that men should not be objectifying women. That's absolutely correct. Right. You know, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And then women turning around and essentially treating themselves as objects. Right. You know, there's a logical disconnect
under the guise of empowerment.
Right.
Yeah, and something else like that you were hinting at too is when we're kicking the line down the field to the point of wanting to remove it altogether, is that what we don't realize is these boundaries, you know, God's no is always in the context of a broader yes. You know, when God says no to sexual promiscuity, it's in the context of, like what Allison is hinting at, that holding on to, because, and science actually has come out and proven this and backed it up.
You better be right, because Allison's going to prove you wrong.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But there have been studies saying that sex is more than just a physical interaction, that there are certain emotional and psychological tolls that it has. And so when our culture treats it as simply a casual handshake, you know, then we shouldn't be surprised when down the line it has all of these ramifications. So we can kind of think of God's no's to promiscuity as the guardrails. You know, when I come to church, I use Winter's Run a lot of times, but there's a lot of sharp turns. There's a guardrail there, which I'm very thankful for, because if I hit that corner too fast, I'm going to wind up in the river.
I am too, especially I've seen how he drives.
So, yeah, we can think of God's no's as a guardrail guiding us on the right path. And so when we want to remove that guardrail, we don't see the danger that lies on the other side of it.
Right. Katie Lander here says, also as a parent, you may not be letting your child listen or watch, but that doesn't mean they aren't doing that without your knowledge. That gets back to the point Mary Kay was kind of hinting at before. And I'll tell you that my other, building on that, Katie, is I find it kind of, I don't know, let's say not lack of understanding or overly simplistic when people say, well, if you don't like it, don't listen to it. Or if you don't like it, don't. Because people, I believe, are rightfully entitled to be concerned about the broader direction of the culture. And the fact of the matter is, when you say, if you don't like it, don't listen to it, all you're basically saying is you just be quiet and let me do what I want to do.
Why does the FCC
I'm sorry,
exist?
but I know, but who was warning me? I'm sorry. You might want to turn off your TV while you're watching the Grammys, which is an award show.
Right.
I might want to see who's winning awards for their hard work on a broadcast television channel. Who put the warning up? Did the warning come up? TV mature.
Right.
Did it come up
No.
so that I could make a choice that, oh, there's going to be something here that I'm not going to want to see? No. It just happened. And let's face it, they did it for that reason. Because if they're doing it in their video, then I have to seek it out. Okay.
But they
I
have
have
the
to go to whatever venues are now available because, yes, I'm old. Back in our day, it was MTV. It was actually music.
They played music
at one point.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that. So, I mean, I would have to go and search out the video. Okay. That's not the intent of this show. The intent of the show was to give out these awards. They were going to have people performing. Yes. But unless they advertised ahead of time what songs everybody were performing, then how did a viewer know?
Yeah, you're right.
And you would have to know, you would already have to
Yep.
know, oh, this person has some racy lyrics. I don't want to see that performance when it's coming up. And a lot of these award shows are like, they are, it reminded me of when we were watching the, like the telethons or the Thanksgiving Day parade where you would hear so-and-so is coming up, but then it would take an hour before you would even see them.
Right.
And like, so the question is, how much notice did somebody have to choose not to see this performance versus not listening to the song?
Well, and my point is, even if we did have that, let's say you take your example of the video or music videos that you have to seek out. I do believe that our culture as a whole should be engaged in conversations about the direction that it's headed. Mm-hmm. And so even if I have the freedom not to watch that and I'm not watching it, that doesn't mean I'm not concerned with the fact that I know that's out there and that is influencing the direction the culture is going. And that's true, and I will defend the right of people who disagree with me about the direction the culture should go, that they also have that right to express that view, even if, you don't, now I do think that you should be informed. I mean, if you're going to start talking about specifics about, well, I object that Tucker Carlson said XYZ in a show, you should know if Tucker Carlson actually said X, Y, or Z on a show, But that being said, even if it's not your cup of tea and you have the freedom not to watch it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't impact you in any way, shape, or form, because we are all impacted by our culture.
Yeah.
And so we do have a vested interest in expressing those opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right.
Just one more thing.
Sure.
And I just want to go back to something that Ben was saying. He was talking about how, I'm sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you're gonna have to correct me. But you mentioned something about how, sex is not just a physical act.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
That there's a lot more involved. There's emotions. There's
And Allison didn't correct him, so I'm guessing he was scientifically correct.
Yeah.
there's
She's
Either that or Allison's not watching it.
intellect. There's like intellectual things.
Mhm.
I mean,
Psychological.
yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, let's face it. The first way it all starts is usually from a look. Something about the way this person looks, for a lack of a better way of saying it, turns you on. So there's a different and you haven't even physically touched them yet. So there's something mental, something psychological, something emotional, or some way that this has affected, the site has affected you, that has started the process. And again, you know, if stuff is done in the bedroom between married people, that's their business, but they're not necessarily putting it out there for everybody to see. And I guess that's the biggest thing. But one thing I want to point out is, if correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, but you told me that at least one of these performers is a devout Catholic.
Cardi B claims to be a devout Catholic. Yes.
Wow, I didn't know that.
You know, that was in one of the articles that I read.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's
She really can't think the Pope is very proud of her right now. I mean, I really just
That's
no.
between her and God. You know.
I know, but
you know,
still.
we say what we say here, but I'm not God. But all right, we are. How much time we're already at almost the 50-minute mark, so we should move on to story number 3.
All right.
Our third. We have 4, just 4 today, so we're okay. And our last ones, I don't think are going to be as long as the first 2, but I don't know. We'll see. So our third story for tonight comes out of Canada, actually, and the story indicates that a Canadian father whose name is actually under a publication ban by the court, so they're not allowed to say what the father's name is, but he was arrested after he violated a court order banning him from speaking out about his biological daughter's gender transition. And the way this works, just so people know, it wasn't that there's some Canadian law in the books that said you can't talk about this. There was it presented itself when he found out that his child, the age is not, the current age of the child is not disclosed in this article, but it looks like she was 13 at the time the litigation started. She was undergoing hormone therapy to undergo a transition, and from biological female to transgender male, and the father objected to this. He and the mother are separated, and the mother was supportive of it, and so he actually brought the case in court, saying that his argument was that both parents should need to consent before a minor can start getting this kind of hormone treatment, and the court disagreed with him. And actually ordered him, apparently, according to this article, not just disagree with him and said they didn't need his consent, but that said that the father could not voice his opposition to his daughter's decision, and was warned that any attempt to pressure his child to change course would be considered a form of family violence punishable by law. Now, I don't know if that's a quote from the article I'm reading from here. I don't know if that's a quote from the actual decision. But that's what came up. Now, apparently, and the article is a little short on details as far as what exactly the father did, but apparently after being ordered by the court not to speak out, in some capacity, he spoke out. He was brought back to court, and he was found in contempt of court for violating the court's order, and then he was incarcerated. For how long? Again, the article doesn't say, but that's kind of what we've been able to piece together based on this. What are your thoughts, Ben?
2 things that really concern me about this article. Number 1 is the fact that apparently all of this took place. She was 11 years old at the time. His daughter was 11 years old at the time when she expressed a desire, or she was having some dysphoria, and she expressed a desire to be recognized as a male. And so it says that the girl's transition apparently started at school, where she was being exposed to pro-transgender educational materials, and because she did suffer from feelings of dysphoria, the school began referring to her by a male name, and put that new name in her 7th grade yearbook. Here's the clincher: all without informing her parents, either of them. So even though the mother was supportive, the school did this without informing the parents, started referring to her by a new male name and putting that in the yearbook. And this is an 11-year-old, or she was 11 when this started.
Right.
So between the ages of 11 and 13. That was number 1 that was really concerning to me.
All right, just throw out again. This was in Canada, right?
Canada,
Correct.
yes.
British
British Columbia.
Canada. However, although that doesn't...
Of which Ken is not a privy to their law, a lot of their laws, so don't ask.
So don't ask me for legal advice.
Yeah. Although to my understanding, it's not like when you think of Canada, they're not, to my understanding, their legal system isn't that far off.
It's not that far off. I don't know if they have quite the extensive free speech rights that we do here in America, but it's, comparable.
Yeah. So the fact that it is a comparable nation, and something like this happens is very concerning as far as where our culture could be heading, our nation could be heading. And the second thing that I found very disturbing, it just ties into the fact that he was ordered not to specifically, Ballman and Fisher ordered the father to refer to his biological daughter only by male pronouns. The court order that he was in contempt of was to only refer to her by male pronouns. And the concern that I have is when you start legislating speech. That's legislating speech, what you can and can't say. And now, again, this is Canada, which I don't know their freedom of speech laws, but
regardless of the freedom of speech laws, it's still concerning. But
exactly.
If your speech laws allow this, then I think we should be voicing concern whether your speech laws should be allowing this.
Exactly. And those are my two main concerns with this, to which I don't know the proper response other than, I'm very...
All right, before we get too much into people's opinions and thoughts, just out of curiosity, because you said, okay, so the mom and dad are divorced.
Separated.
Separated.
Yeah. They're separate. They're not even divorced. Okay, so who has custodial rights? Was that any of that indicated? I mean, is she living? She's just living with her mom?
It's unclear, but the father did voice the opinion that in order for her to undergo hormonal treatment, that it should be both parents should have to consent to it, which apparently did not happen.
Right.
Let's just out of curiosity, Ken. Let's take this and put this in the United States. I know it would be a state's thing, right? Whether
family law is typically state driven. Yeah,
okay.
Not federal.
So then Maryland. Let's stick it in Maryland because I can, and you would know. Well, maybe you might know. Most medical procedures. Is there any a time when one parent doesn't have the right to speak up about or have a hand in the decision when it's a minor?
Okay, I'm going to preface this by saying my wife is asking about the one area of law that I avoided through my entire
I know. That's why I knew you were going to be unhappy with
family
me.
law. I did one, what was supposed to, but back in my youth, forgive me, but I did do one that was supposed to be an uncontested divorce where I helped draft up the property agreement and everything like that. And that was enough to me to decide I'm never doing that again. And I was a very young lawyer. It was in my first couple years at practicing. And I never was going to do child custody and everything like that. For those of you that know me, I have serious issues, and they probably come through on the show before, with anything involving child suffering. If there's my wife has a movie she used to like to watch all the time, Hope Floats, and there's a scene in there. There's a scene there where the dad is walking away from his kid, and I actually leave the room when that scene comes on. I can't be in there for that. So I wasn't going to do child custody and things like that. I've avoided that area of law. Now, that being said, there's certain things you have to learn when you go through law school, so I do still know some of it. But yes, the answer to your question is, are there times when, is it possible where only one parent would be needed to consent to a medical procedure? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can have situations where a parent has completely lost their parental rights for one reason or another. It just depends on what the custody order is. There's two different types of custody, at least, again, speaking here in Maryland, two different types of custody when it comes to children. There's legal custody and there's physical custody. Lots of time, generally speaking, they run together, but they don't necessarily have to. Physical custody is literally who physically has the child, visitation, things like that could play into that. Legal custody is who has the legal right to make decisions for that child. Generally, courts like to leave that joint, but there certainly have been instances, rare instances, where it's not joint, and one parent has sole legal custody, even if the other one might have some physical custody, another one might have sole legal custody, and so in that circumstance, it is possible that you could have a situation where one parent's consent was only needed in order to do something like this.
All right, so they're not divorced. So again,
I don't even know if they were ever married. The article even say it just says they're separated. I don't know what that means. They were married to begin with.
Clear.
Oh, okay. But all right, so if they're separated, does custody is not decided until after that, isn't it?
No, it can be decided any time. I mean,
okay.
There's not enough information here for us to say what the custody arrangement is. We have no idea.
So we don't know if he had any rights to speak up.
We don't.
Okay.
That's correct. We don't.
In the case that they weren't ever married, I know that gets into sticky situations when parents were never married and
Not in custody issues. I mean, custody. If you're a biological parent, then you have a legal responsibility to take care of that kid. And so, whether you're married or not married, well, there's certainly other complicating factors that get in there. I mean, it's not like you have more of a responsibility to care for your kid if you were married to the spouse versus if you weren't. You still have the same obligations legally.
as long as it's verified that you're the parent.
Well, yes, and that's where you
I mean,
get
yeah,
into
okay.
child support and all that.
All right, so just to get some of that out of the way, we don't really know what the status is.
We don't. And I did want to say, and thank you for bringing that up. And, and like I said, there's a couple other things. I think, Ben, you found, I didn't see at the bottom where it says click for more information. I probably could have gotten more information. So you may know more about this than I do. But in fairness, I didn't see, at least in my reading, things about specifically, other than obviously he did refer to his daughter with female pronouns that are male pronouns. Other than that, did he do anything else to speak out against it? I don't know exactly what he did. I don't know exactly for sure what the order said, because again, I'm reading this article which doesn't have quotation marks on it, so I don't know precisely what the overall context is here. That being said, you're right. Regardless of what his custody rights were and his ability to make legal decisions on behalf of that child, that's a different question than saying what he can say and what he can't say. Yeah. It's like now we got the thought police coming down here. And that's, to me, pretty disturbing. And I'll tell you something else that I saw in this story that made me think of what we were talking about in the last one about, the certain lingo, certain keywords, that people use to try to influence culture. We talked about taking ownership of your body being the example of the last one, because it sounds good. Who wants to disagree with that and say, well, wait a minute, what do we actually mean by that?
Right.
There's another one here that came up in this article that I've seen come up before. It's not an isolated incident. And that was that this coming from the court that said if he attempted to pressure his child to change course, would be considered a form of family violence punishable by law. And we've gotten that term violence because nobody likes violence. Violence is a bad thing, right? And so what's happening is specifically in this issue, we are seeing those that are in favor, and again, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, I don't want to say everybody, but I will give one specific example in a minute so I'm not just making this up. People that are in favor of affirming these, people saying you have to refer to them by their chosen pronoun, things like that. That term violence is what's being used. There was a lot of people have probably seen or at least heard of the online program by Steven Crowder called Change My Mind. Mm-hmm. He's a meme factory. People love to, put pictures of him behind the table and change whatever the sign says. You've done it.
Well, have you seen? Well, there's one. I just got to interject it here because I thought it was really funny. I'll show it to you. It's Paul on Damascus. He says, "I'm going to persecute Christians. Change my mind." And then the next one, he's sitting with Jesus. He says, "My mind's changed."
Yeah, I have seen that one. And so I'm not, don't take this to be as an endorsement for Steven Crowder. I mean, I agree with him on some things. I disagree with him on other things. Sometimes I agree with his manner, to getting back to that, winsome method. Sometimes I don't. But in this instance, it was the topic. I can't remember exactly how he phrased his sign, but I think it was "There Are Two Genders, Change My Mind" is what the program was. And someone, it was a reasonably amicable conversation, as most of his conversations on that program are. But one of the points this person that was sitting down with him was making to him was that, if you don't call someone by their preferred pronoun, that is an act of violence, is what she was saying. And she was using this term. And he was kind of objecting to that. And if I were to boil down what he's saying, he's like, do you understand, to quote Princess Bride, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Because when you say someone's committing violence, now he was saying that, you're actually accusing me of committing a crime against you, which I think he was overstating his case a little bit there. Not all acts of violence are criminal. You can have self-defense, things like that. Something can be violent and not be a crime. But his but his point was that, that term has meaning. And its meaning is not just because I'm saying something you disagree with. We've now taken to the point where we're calling words acts of violence. Right. And that is another direction I see our culture going that concerns me, because it's using rhetoric rather than reason. We want to influence people, and it's very effective. Yeah. It's very effective. Where you influence people by by the terminology and the rhetoric you're using rather than actually your arguments. And I will say, I give you an example where it happens on both sides. And getting back to that abortion issue, and I'm not saying yes or no to these particular labels, but what do the two sides on the abortion debate call themselves? Pro-life and pro-choice. Well, who's against choice? Nobody's against choice. Well, who's against life? We all like life.
Exactly.
You know, that's why you use that kind of language, because it influences based upon people's preconceived conceptions of what those words mean. And so when you now attach a word like violence to just someone saying certain words that are not in any way advocating any kind of physical contact whatsoever, that's where we start to get, I think, go down a dangerous path.
And two, I would add to it is that that position is untenable. To say that words are violence, well then, now, because I disagree with you that words are not violence, by you saying that they are violent, now you're committing violence against me.
But they're going to limit it to just those particular words. Don't you see how the way how the discussion is shaped? It's oh no, only the words that you're saying are violence, not the words that I'm saying.
Right. So that position doesn't hold water.
Yeah, but so I was really concerned when I read this article that, I mean, I get that when you're on a college campus and you're talking to people that are advocating for position, things like that happen. That's the way our culture communicates. I disagree with it. I'm going to all the time talk about bring ideas into the marketplace of ideas. I'm all in favor of that. I was very concerned if this is even remotely a direct quote to see that kind of language coming out of a court.
Yeah.
Whether it be in Canada or someone else.
Right.
You know, that somewhere else. That's concerning to me. That the court was using the term violence to say if he tried to persuade his daughter, and it's not clear where the modifier is, whether it was just expressing opposition and attempting to his daughter, like either one would suffice as an act of violence.
Wait, can you read the quote again?
And again, this is this quote from the article. It says, in their decision, the justices of the British Columbia Court of Appeals ruled the father could not voice his opposition to his daughter's decision and was warned any attempt to pressure his child to change course would be considered a form of family violence punishable by law. So
I wonder if the court referred to his daughter as his daughter, because is that against the rules?
Well, you know what?
Are we supposed to now call her?
This is in your article.
His son.
Right.
Well, I don't know. I'm getting confused.
Well, so I don't know if this is in.
I'm
that
confusing
article
myself.
That you printed out, but this might kind of shed light. I still don't think it has a full quote, but there are some quotations in here. It says, in their decision, the justices of the BC Court of Appeals ruled the father could not voice his opposition to his daughter's decision and was warned any attempt to pressure his child to change course would be considered a form of family violence punishable by law. Chief Justice Robert Ballman and Justice Barbara Fisher said the dad's, quote, refusal to accept his teenage daughter's choices, quote, is troublesome.
They refer to it as a daughter.
Well, that's an article. It's not
right.
It's not necessarily providing a direct quote from what the court said.
No, the only part in quotes is refusal to accept.
Oh, okay.
And then is troublesome, adding that the failure to endorse his kid's desire for irreversible transgender treatment has caused minor significant pain, in quotes, and, quote, resulted in a rupture of what both parties refer to as an otherwise loving parent-child relationship.
And Tim Foster here on Facebook, or YouTube rather, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the same passage that we just talked about in connection with our last story. Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Tim, if you weren't able to watch from the beginning, go back to the story right before this, because that's what's the guy from Skelet's name?
John Cooper.
John Cooper, in relation to the Cardi B thing, that's the point that he was making. He was talking about how he was concerned about the direction that our culture is going, is kind of redefining good and evil, and he had concern about it. Now, I had some issues with the way he expressed his opinions, potentially, but possibly not being wise. But that was the overall point that he was making there.
Right.
So anyway, that's concerning. Why don't we? Because we are at 6:35 right now, and we do have to be off by 7 o'clock. Because at 7 o'clock, we want to encourage everybody who's watching us on YouTube to stay here on the YouTube channel, where you will see our last week, our final week of the Lent at Home series. Mm-hmm. This is really cool. First of all, if you're on the fence, it's like, well, I've watched the last 4. Do I really need to watch the 5th one? I'm just going to say 2 words that will guarantee make you want to watch this edition. Reese Turner. That's all I got to say. For those of you that know Reese, you know you're going to want to tune in. Reese is delivering the message tonight, and it's on battling in prayer is what we're talking about this evening. So stay here on the channel. That video premieres at 7 o'clock. If you're watching us on Facebook, go over to the YouTube channel, because it's only going to be on YouTube. You can watch it there. And then tomorrow night, I'm going to give you one last chance to plug it. What's tomorrow night at 7 o'clock on the channel?
This is also the last week of the 7 Steps to Bible Skills, which is 11. It's a 7-11 course, 7 steps in 11 weeks. But yeah, this is the last week. We are wrapping up, kind of tying it all together, how these steps apply to us personally. So if you would like, or if you've missed any of those, you can catch up on them on our YouTube channel, but also catch us live tomorrow night.
And we have an endorsement for the Lent at Home series from Allison Mayer. Says the Lent at Home has been great. Thank you. I agree.
Cool.
And for those of you who don't know what that series has been, it's a midweek, kind of short 30 to 40 minute or so worship services, abbreviated, not the full liturgy and everything like that. Kind of acoustic with the music. And the whole idea is we've been talking about prayer. Everything's been about prayer and about helping you grow in your prayer life and to kind of become more comfortable in it. And so it's been very practical and I think very helpful. So.
Yeah, we've been using the Daniel Prayer by Anne Graham Lotz.
Yes.
That's the book. Yeah.
All right, so Ben, what's our last story for tonight?
All right, so for tonight, the last one we have, this particular article is from ChristianHeadlines.com, but the headline is Washington University professor says credits from courses on creationism should not count toward a science degree. Now, that headline is a little bit misleading because of what this particular professor is advocating. So the professor that the article is referring to is Dr. Joshua. I apologize. It's Swamidass.
I think so. I
think so.
Yeah.
So it says this constructive solution would hold Christian institutions to a higher academic standard than other colleges. Basically, his argument is that certain accreditations, colleges require accreditation from a national or sometimes regional accreditation group that basically, based off of national norms and standards, can accredit whether or not a college holds to those norms and standards. So his argument is that certain creationist colleges, which would typically be Christian colleges, who hold to the position of creationism. Now, this professor isn't advocating for old earth creationism or even the simple doctrine of creation that God created everything, but specifically he wants to readdress the young earth creationism, that God, it's more of that literal interpretation that God created the earth in a literal, and it's a young earth creationism, because that deviates from national norms, because that position deviates from national norms, that it should be held to a standard of transparency. I think that is what he is particularly advocating for, that they can be included in the curriculum, but they should note somewhere on those course catalogs that they deviate from the norm of standard scientific acceptance. That's the nuts and bolts.
So if a national standard says that in order to get a degree that requires X number of science credits, he just doesn't want those to count as science credits.
Yeah, it'd be more like if you're transferring to another institution, for example, things like that, you wouldn't get credit for any course that includes creationism, essentially in its curriculum.
Wait, at all in its curriculum?
No, any
like
science course.
Yeah.
Any science doesn't, right. He has said that, if you want to have these courses, you can teach the exact same course, but just designate it as theology or philosophy.
Or hermeneutics,
don't designate it as science.
So if you even bring it up in a science course, once.
We'll get to
Not
that.
necessarily.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
All right.
That's interesting. There is an example that they raise here. First of all, and interest of full disclosure, do I know Dr. Swamidass? No, never met the man before in my life. Personally, have I interacted with him? Yes. Those of you who know me, I'm a Christian apologist, and an organization that I've been affiliated with, at least loosely, since I want to say 2013 is when I used to write for them, was the Christian Apologetics Alliance. And I used to write a number of blog posts and articles for them. It's basically a collection of Christian apologists from around the world that they tried. The original vision was they had an online blog, which I think they still do, although it's not as popular as it used to be. It doesn't have as much content as it used to my understanding last time I checked. But it was a hub, basically. It was a central resource where a lot of apologists could contribute to, so that, any one person, like perfect case for myself, I don't have time to really monitor my own blog day in, day out. But now we could all contribute to it, and there could be a lot of content, kind of the power in numbers, so to speak. I'm also part of the Facebook group for the organization. So is Dr. Swamidass. He is one of the apologists in the Christian Apologetics Alliance. So for those of you wondering if this is a Christian saying this, yes, he is. And so we've interacted through that Facebook group. He's a pretty frequent poster on there, and we do interact quite a bit. This particular story, as a matter of fact, him being a frequent poster, he had posted something I think was completely unconnected to this, and another member of the group actually in the comments section asked him about this and to address this, and I'm kind of happy he did, because then Dr. Swamidass has actually published a question and answer article where he was trying to clear up some of what he said was the confusion about this, and he linked that in the group, and so I was able to find it and see what his side of the story was in all of this. This story kind of hits home for me for a variety of reasons, none of which are really the fact that I've interacted with this professor before. Most people know that I'm currently in seminary. I attend Luther Rice Seminary. I'm pursuing a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics. Well, I chose Luther Rice because at the time when I first started there, they were just tracks accredited. And now they're also regionally accredited with the same, the Southern, it's a big long name, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. Yeah. So they have since received regional accreditation. Coincidentally, at the time, like right before they announced regional accreditation, like, I don't know, within 6 months before then, they issued a statement that says essentially they're revamping a large portion of their apologetics curriculum. Guess what was gone? Both of the science courses that were required now I had already taken them, and so it was not, didn't affect me. Some of the other changes did affect me somewhat, but basically all of a sudden the program became much more theology oriented as opposed to what I liked about it originally, which it was very broad based. It had philosophy, it had science, it had theology, it had a lot of things. It really did do what I felt that a master's level program should do from an apologetics standpoint, which is give you the generalities of it, enable you to be a competent generalist out there. And then if you want to go on to the PhD, that's when you're going to specialize in one particular area. But the science courses disappeared. Now I think I know why. Because they were pursuing regional accreditation. They got it, kudos, but this is the price that was paid for it. And so that hits home kind of to me in that regard, because I can see what's happening is these regional accreditational bodies are basically going in and saying, well, that's not science, because let's face it, the science courses that I took did have creationists, not exclusively, mind you. Sure. It's not like they were just, here's the creationism, but it was taught. It was taught. And by creationism, I'm meaning the same thing that Dr. Solomon was talking about, young Earth creationism. Yeah. This is a Baptist college, and Southern Baptist University, and so that's very ingrained in their thought. I'm not going to get into my particular thoughts. Just suffice it to say that I have them. I have my thoughts, and I don't necessarily, whatever you're thinking, I think, we may agree, we may disagree. I have my own opinions about age of the Earth and all that. I'm not going to get sidetracked down that. What Dr. Swamidass was trying to do, according to his piece here, is essentially what's happening is there's the CHEA, which is this national body that it kind of like the accreditor of accreditors. They basically say whether this agency that's claiming that they can go around accrediting universities, whether they're really applying good standards or not, whether they're legit. So it's an extra badge of honor for tracks, for example, to have CHEA recognize them. Yeah. All right. CHEA is now going through a process where they're saying, well, we don't know if we're going to continue to recognize tracks or not. And so Dr. Swamidass is kind of stepping in and saying, hey, before you make your decision later this year about that, how about if the sides kind of come together and try to work out a compromise, work out something that addresses the concerns of some of the folks over there at CHEA, but also allows these institutions that are teaching creationism, young Earth creationism, to still continue to be accredited. So it doesn't have to be, basically saying it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Right. It's not like we're either going to credit them or not. There's got to be some middle ground. And for that, I applaud him. I do. I think that is, he's trying to step in, using his influence to try to bring people together. That's great. Where I have some issues is where, what his proposal actually is. Because he's saying things like, well, there's one course at Bob Jones University that they specifically mentioned here, that based upon the course description, appears to, yes, it includes creationist perspectives. It also includes Darwinian evolutionary perspectives, and it teaches them all. And the Bob Jones president has come out and said that our students are required to be conversant with all perspectives. So it's not like this is a course solely on creationism.
Right.
That they're saying that as a result of what Dr. Swamidath is proposing, it's not just a course solely on creationism that now isn't getting scientific credit. Now the students wouldn't be getting credit for even work they're doing on Darwinian evolution, learning things about that. So that's part of the maybe difficulty I have. One part of the difficulty I have with it is you're trying to parse things out that aren't as clear cut necessarily. Yeah. The other thing I have concerns with is the standard that it's setting. And he said, Dr. Swamidath says, look, I'm only talking young earth creationism. Well, of course you are, because you're not a young earth creationist, you know?
Right.
And he says, but I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not applying this to intelligent design, for example, which a lot of the folks at the Discovery Institute, one of the organizations that's objected to this, he says they misrepresented him. Discovery Institute's a lot of intelligent design proponents. He's like, I'm not saying that. This wouldn't apply to that. It would just apply to young earth creationism. I'm not saying it wouldn't apply to old earth creationism. Wouldn't apply to any of that. And my question is, can we really be that naive? You open this door.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk what's contrary to national norms? You say that young earth creationism is contrary to national norms. So is the intelligent design movement. You know, the fact of the matter is they are a minority viewpoint out there. And so the exact same logical reasoning that you're using for this case will, I believe, very easily then, if you allow this, will then be extrapolated to others.
It's that moving that line, and then the creationism itself is on the other side, which is going to be moved one step further.
Right.
So yeah, I would agree with that. And again, kind of what he's trying to do in bringing people together. Yeah, there's got to be some middle ground. I'm not sure what that is, honestly. But this, yeah, and there are some other people in this article. Dr. Klinghoffer, I guess. It says creationist thoughts and those who think them are indeed penalized in this system, which gets back to that point that, creationism as a whole is deviant from national norms. And so this very clearly lends itself to, well, we're only going to teach what the norms are. And so when we completely rule out any deviation, well, then how can we be conversant and formulate our own ideas? And that detracts from a higher level, detracts from critical thought in general. It by not presenting students with both sides, how can they be conversant with it?
Now, let me play devil's advocate out there, and I agree with you. I think that part of the danger of this standard is if all you teach is what everybody already agrees upon, then you're not inspiring independent thought.
Yeah.
You know, and nothing's ever going to change. We want to encourage people to challenge the norms, because that's how you discover. I mean, look, no theory out there is perfect. I mean, everybody thought Newtonian physics was beautiful until they discovered quantum physics, you know, and all of a sudden it's like, oops, throw that out the window. Not entirely, but you know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's like you need to encourage that kind of thought. But playing devil's advocate, is there a line to be drawn there too, though? I mean, if you've got somebody who, I mean, I'm probably going to get people objecting me. I don't believe in a flat earth. Okay. Sorry. I don't. Earth is a sphere. I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming about that.
Sure.
So what if you have some...
Thank you for saying that word correctly.
What?
Oh, my biggest pet peeve.
Sphere? Yeah.
Yes. It is not a spear.
It's not a
That's
sphere.
pointy.
It's a sphere. Yes. Not even a perfect sphere, really. But my point is that, you know, is there still a legitimate concern out there? Does accreditation lose credibility at some point? In other words, is there a danger of the opposite extreme?
Well, I guess we need to look at how we're defining how something is being taught. Is a flat Earth model seriously going to be taught here? I understand the.
Is it going to be taught in a science class? You know,
right. Is that seriously going to be taught in a science class? Maybe it's taught in a debate class. You know, could there be value of at least presenting the argument so that you have debate? Again, going back to that free marketplace of ideas, I think at least by understanding what people think, even if it's way out here, I still would be hesitant to, not include that in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, when these courses are being taught, and you've got two models side by side, and the professor isn't making any conclusion on one side or the other, and just leaving it up to the students, where is that line? Can they bring in a flat Earth, whatever other extemporaneous models are out there?
And the danger is the culture is such that there's a large portion of the scientific community that would equate, for example, the arguments in favor of intelligent design with the arguments for a flat Earth, and I think that's a misrepresentation, to say the least.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I think I was cutting you off. Sorry.
No. Well, I think we just have to be careful with that, not to throw it out. But I guess my line might even be further down than that. My line would be anything that's going to incite violence, not speech violence, but anything that's going
Getting
to
back to our last story.
yeah, anything that is dangerous. And that's a tricky thing too.
And we finally found a way to connect this one with the previous story.
Right. But and that gets into a whole quagmire of
well, and it's
ideas.
there's a lot of things. Like even Dr. Swamidass says, he said in here, like, I'm not speaking to the university. I'm not really particularly speaking to them. I'm not speaking to the students, to the professors. I'm really directing my comments towards the accreditation agency. And I'm like, well, yes and no. You're definitely addressing it to the accreditation agency, but at the same time, you're advocating that these universities should actually put on the transcripts, a designation that this science credit that this student earned was not in accord with national norms. So that's going to be on their transcript for all time. And so you are kind of insisting that you talk to the university do that. And that's where it just starts to get, I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with it. I don't know what the solution is. I don't pretend to have all the answers. Something about this particular solution, though, makes me uncomfortable. And again, in his defense, I do think he also said somewhere that this is just meant to be a conversation starter. It doesn't, I mean, he's throwing this out there to try to get people talking. Maybe there's some other solution they'll come to. And to that, again, I do applaud him for that part of it, at least.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. We have to get off the air because it is 6:53. And like I said, at 7 o'clock, we have the fifth and final Lent at home. I will say this is the fifth and final Lent at home, but of course, Easter ain't here yet. We got a whole Holy Week still yet to come.
Yeah.
And I'd like to invite everybody to join us both online and in person. We have got so much going on in Holy Week. It's insane. I feel like an old TV commercial. We've got obviously the Palm Sunday worship services that are going to be live streamed and in person, 1100 Philadelphia Road, Joppa, Maryland. At 9 o'clock for traditional, 11 o'clock for contemporary. Also, we filmed our Passion Play. At least the plan right now, if I can get it all edited together, is still to release that in increments. So throughout Holy Week, you will be able to watch segments of the Passion Play. We've talked about this. Don't look at me like that.
I wasn't. You guys went out of focus for a little bit. I was
well, the autofocus on the camera. It's probably the lights messing with it. I'm moving around a lot.
You're waving your arms a little too emphatically, I guess.
Anyway, so like for example, on Palm Sunday, you'll be able to watch the portion of the Passion Play that deals with the triumphal entry, and we'll be releasing portions of that throughout the week so you can follow Jesus' journey and his passion during Holy Week. And then, of course, on Easter weekend, we will release the entire Passion Play in its entirety as well. Then we've got running through Monday, Thursday. We've got stop me if I'm missing something. Well, there's online. There's our school's chapel.
Yep.
There's gonna be a regular chapel on Wednesday, which is actually a talent show, and then a special Thursday afternoon or Thursday at noon.
I don't think that the talent show is going to be available for everybody to watch.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. But the Thursday one is. There's going to be a special
Yes.
Monday, Thursday chapel service at noon on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. There's going to be the Monday, Thursday worship service at 7 o'clock Thursday night. Can you tell us anything about that? What's happening at that service? Do you know, or should I get Ryan in here? He's not here.
Yeah, it'll be more to what we're kind of used to with our Monday, Thursday services. If you worshiped with us here on a Monday, Thursday, we've got our standard liturgical elements, stripping the altar. So it's very, preparing us for that Good Friday. So, but definitely something. We will not be doing the foot washing. So we're just keeping COVID distance. But there are going to be our standard liturgical elements in that.
And again, that'll be online and in person, 7 o'clock Thursday night, 7 o'clock Friday night, speaking of Good Friday. Traditionally, we've had the Passion Play on Friday night because it's all video. We're not doing that, or are we? We are having a Friday night worship service. It's going to have some service elements, and also we'll be showing the Passion Play up through the crucifixion, like we normally end the Passion Play on that Friday night. So again, you can come in person and watch it in person on the screens. It will also be available online. And then, of course, Easter Sunday. Wait.
Holy Saturday, we've got a 24 hours
24 hours of prayer. Yes. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so on Saturday, 24 hours of prayer. If you have not signed up for that, this is a very low commitment. It's just between you and the Lord, but we're hoping to in 15-minute increments throughout the entire 24 hours of Saturday from midnight to midnight, the day before Easter, we are covering everybody in prayer, our families, our schools, our country, our churches, our nation, the world. And so there's a bunch of prayer topics online, trinityjapa.org. Just click on the button in our slideshow that says 24 hours of prayer. You can sign up for a slot on there and get some prayer prompts.
You don't have to come to the church. You don't have to be on a Zoom call. You don't have to record yourself. It's
Between
literally just you and God.
Yep.
But how wonderful is that to think that someone's praying here in our Trinity connections, our family, our community for 24 hours straight. That's just amazing. And then, of course, we get to Easter Sunday. We have the traditional Easter worship at 9 o'clock, contemporary Easter worship at 11 o'clock. We got some strings coming in. We're going to have the Hallelujah chorus. We got some neat ideas about how to make that work. So it's a busy Holy Week around here. If you're not local to us, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, subscribe because you're not going to want to miss any of this. If you're not comfortable coming in yet, subscribe. You can watch it all. If you are local and you're
Click the bell so you know when it's coming.
What's that?
Click the bell for notifications.
Click the bell for notifications as well here. But please join us again, 1100 Philadelphia Road, Joppa, Maryland. We got a lot of exciting stuff happening. And now by my clock, we got 2 minutes, so we got to get off the air. So thank you all for listening, for watching, everybody out there. Remember, we will not be on for the next 2 weeks. We will be back 3 weeks from now with a very special 150th episode of Trinity. You just faded us out. A little premature there.
I was just getting the cursor ready.
150th episode. I say special. I don't know if it's going to be special, but it will be our 150th episode.
We've got 3 weeks to figure it out.
We got 3 weeks to figure that out. So thank you all for watching. Thank you, Mary Kay, despite the premature saying, Ken, you're just like playing me off. It's the music playing me off the stage.
Yeah, one thing.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
See y'all in 3 weeks or earlier if you come to join us for Easter. God bless.
God bless.